Alright guys, this is part 2 of period 3. My apologies, I tried to get it all in 15 minutes, but apparently that's not going to work. So to wrap it up here in the next couple of minutes, in the last one we talked about the failures of the Articles of Confederation and Shays' Rebellion and how that's going to lead to what is first thought of as going to be a revision to the Articles of Confederation, and ends up being a completely new document. And that document is the Constitution, which is, kind of how the country is run today. As far as the Constitution goes, you can read through the components of it in the review book, but the main point is going to be the compromises. Okay, the first of which is going to be the Grand Compromise, which was basically between large states and small states, and it has to do with how the states were going to be represented in Congress. The large states wanted the number of representatives to be based on the population. Small states wanted it to be based equally, a certain number that is equal for each state. And what ends up happening is, like I said, they compromise, and we end up with a bicameral legislature, or two houses of our legislature, which is the House of Representatives that we have today, which is the number of reps is based on the population of the state, and then the Senate, which is the other part, which was a concession to the small states, in which every state has two representatives. The other compromise would be with regards to slavery, which is the Three-Fifths Compromise, which was a way to, which was a compromise between northern and southern states. Basically, what it said was that in the Constitution, for representative purposes, a slave was going to count as 3/5 of a man. And that was because northern states didn't want to use slave populations as a whole because they would lose power in Congress. So they decided to get kind of close to splitting the difference and use 3/5 for representative. So now that we've written the Constitution, we've got to get it ratified or approved by the states. And as that ratification process goes along, you see two different camps of people come up. As opposed to as for the components of the Constitution as is, and those that are against it. And these guys are called Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And the Federalists are those that are for the Constitution, for a central government, I guess is a better way to put it. And to try to sway public opinion over to their sides, there's a series of articles and pamphlets and other things that are written that, when combined, form the collection known as the Federalist Papers. And what that is the arguments for ratification of the Constitution as is by these people who are for a strong central government. On the other side of this debate, you have the people who were called the Anti-Federalists, like Thomas Jefferson and people of his ilk. These were the people who were opponents of the Constitution being ratified as is, mainly because of a fear of tyranny. They were scared of us slipping back into the abuses and injustices that had led to the American Revolution in the first place. As far as the characteristics of these people, you can see it in a review book, but these are going to be people mostly from rural areas that are more concerned with states' rights. Alright, so we've written and ratified the Constitution. Now it's time for us to actually start governing. And obviously the first president under the Constitution is George Washington. And his presidency marks, number one, the beginnings of America, and also the beginnings of what's referred to as the Federalist era. So Washington and his fellow Federalists take command of the government. Now, he didn't completely go all the way with Federalist control, and the fact that his cabinet, which were the people who were in charge of different components of the government, was made up of a diverse type of people, different viewpoints. Two of the key ones that we'll talk about in the next couple slides being Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. So out of this, you end up, I guess I should say first, remember, we're setting up a government. Like, this is baby steps towards a bigger process, and there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road and a lot of different things that have to be figured out as we get going. And one of the first ones is the divergent views of Jefferson and Hamilton and the conflict that comes from that. And it really boils down to their political philosophies on how a government should be run. From the viewpoint or the point of view of Thomas Jefferson, he was an anti-federalist, as I said earlier, but he felt that the greatest threat to individual freedoms of people in a state or a country or whatever it is was a tyrannical government. And because of that, the government needed to be limited as far as the powers that it had and the things that it could do. And the end-all be-all responsibility of a government was to its people. And he's echoing a lot of Enlightenment thought in that we talked about with the Declaration of Independence. In other words, his point of view carries over from the revolutionary period into the actual government period or governmental period of the beginnings of America. Another thing that comes into the split between them were that you see two different sides to the French Revolution that is happening in the immediate time period after our own revolution. And Jefferson and Anti-Federalists are going to support the people in the French Revolution. They're in favor of what's going on in France. So this would be one of the ways to put this period and these viewpoints into a global context, or to talk about it as how America and the world, I guess you could say, is the different viewpoints on the French Revolution. So Jefferson supports it. He supports what the people are doing, and that's going to come into conflict with what with what Hamilton and Federalists think on both how to run the government and their viewpoints on the revolution. Now, Hamilton's viewpoints are going to be completely opposite of Jefferson's. First of all, he's a Federalist. He's one of the people who had a great fear of what was called the mobocracy after Shays' Rebellion, and advocated for a much stronger, much more centralized form of government in America. So he favored a strong central government. He was one who didn't really care. He was very insensitive to popular will. He believed that elites or aristocrats or the upper levels of society, both economically and social, should run a country, should run our country, because I hate to say it in the frame of they knew best, but he felt that popular will might not lead the country in the direction it needed to go in. He was very remote from emotion when it came to politics. He didn't get caught up in a groundswell of popular ideas and things like that, and for that reason he was against the French Revolution, because he felt it was a threat to the established social order that was present in most societies. So the conflict between Jefferson and Hamilton raises its head during the debates over Hamilton's economic policies. Alexander Hamilton was the first head of the Department of the Treasury, so he was in charge of getting the nation's finances in order and get the ball rolling on how we're economically going to run our country. As far as his economic policies, what he wanted to do is, first of all, he wanted to stimulate economic growth. He wanted to strengthen the finances of the country, and he also believed that he needed to get the Eastern merchants, the upper class of the U.S. economy. He needed to get those people involved in the economy and in the interest of the national government, because it would benefit us going forward. So some of the main goals along with this, he believed that debt was good. One of the things that the federal government did as part of his policies was to assume the debts of states that were accrued in the Revolutionary War. In other words, the federal government's going to pay off the debts of the states. He also believed in tariffs. That was a way to raise revenue and to give the central government, the national government, money to operate with. And once again, it ties into that getting the well-to-do Eastern merchants feeling that the good of the nation is good for them. And these things kind of came into conflict with the way that Jefferson viewed how government and economic policy should work. So once again, going to the last slide, I kind of talked about it there because I forgot this was here, but as far as his actual proposals for how to get our economy going, the National Bank plays into it, which becomes the source of conflict later on with Andrew Jackson and Nicholas Biddle. The tariff, as I said, the funding of national debt, and also one that I didn't hit on, but it's very important, is the excise tax on distilled liquor, particularly whiskey. And what that's going to do is that's going to lead to the Whiskey Rebellion a little bit down the line, as farmers in the Midwest and distillers protest against the excise tax as unfair to them, and then what happens is Washington comes in and basically squashes it and proves the power of the new central government, which for the people who were fans of this, the Federalists, they were completely in favor of it, but it scared Anti-Federalists a little bit. Still going along the lines of the Hamilton versus Jefferson controversy debate, whatever you want to call it, what it all boils down to, guys, is the fact that they looked at the Constitution completely differently. Okay, Jefferson, I'll do Hamilton first. Hamilton believed in a very loose interpretation of the Constitution. In other words, if the Constitution did not say you couldn't do it, then you necessarily couldn't do it. And that is completely opposite of the way that Jefferson looked at it, in the fact that he was what's called a very strict constructionist, where he believed that the only things that the federal government could do were those things that were in the Constitution. You couldn't infer stuff. You couldn't go outside the lines. You had to stick strictly to the words of the Constitution. Hamilton didn't feel like that. He felt like there were a lot of things assumed or implied, and if it didn't say you could do it, then you could do it however you wanted. All right, so fast forwarding a little bit, we move up to Washington's farewell address, which is one of the major documents, primary sources you need to know for this course. In this thing, he warns against a couple of things down the line, in which he sees if we do these things, there could be some problems for the country. Now, this comes from the fact that Washington realizes we're an infant country and we've got to figure things out step by step. So for that reason, number one, we do not need to get involved in foreign entanglements. We're just not ready. We don't have the military, we don't have the economic resources, we don't have the solidarity or cohesion, or we're not united enough to handle getting involved in world events. So he warned against doing that, which, as you'll see, is not really going to happen. And also, he warned against the development of factions or political parties, because he believed that that could divide the country, that could pull us apart. In other words, he believed that you could have disagreements and you could argue about things that we were going to do and as far as how to do them, but at the end of the day, everyone needs to be pointing towards the same direction. And if we don't do that, especially at the beginning, there could be a chance the country would fail. All right, so to wrap up period 3, we talk about very briefly the presidency of John Adams. Really, guys, you need to know two main events of his presidency. The first one is the XYZ affair, which first of all deals with France. And what happened is we had sent 3 diplomats over to negotiate some things with France. They were known as X, Y, and Z, and as they got there, they were told that they would not be able to talk to the King of France unless they paid a bribe for the privilege. Well, what it comes to be seen as is an insult to the country of America, and just not good policy protocol, whatever you want to call it, and it leads people to begin to call for war against France. It's a big controversy. You don't have to know all the components of it, but it's a pretty big deal during his presidency. And the other one is the Alien and Sedition Acts, which deals the first part with aliens or immigrants or foreigners coming into the country, and the fact that they could be kicked out of the country. And then the Sedition Acts is probably the most important, and it was an act in which you could be prosecuted or put in jail for speaking out or criticizing the policies of the government. So just be aware of those 2 facts. We'll deal with them in class at some point, but tie them into Adams. All right, I'm going to wrap up period 3 here because I know I've gone a little long, and I apologize for what it is, but that's the way it's going to be. So in the next one, we'll move on to period 4.